I'm here with Graeme Clinton in the Giant Mine Oversight Board. We're going to have a nice chat. I always do that at the beginning of my interview so I can start them later.
Yeah.
So, Graeme, I can tell you a bit about the project, just so you have a better idea of exactly what I'm interested in learning. Essentially, I'm studying both the history of the mining industry in the North, and when I say the North, I just mean the three territories.
Okay.
Specifically, I'm looking at labor and the working conditions
Okay.
of folks working in the mining industry through all phases of mining, from exploration to remediation.
Yeah.
And this is for my master's thesis, and my supervisor, Dr. Suzanne Mills, is also writing a book on the subject, and so some data will appear in that. And so what I'm particularly interested in about Giant Mine and their remediation is the switch from folks around here working in, the production phase,
Mm-hmm.
mining, to now doing remediation, and the reliance of the local economy on the remediation, whereas a lot of it before, of course, was during actual production.
Okay.
So my first question, I'd like to know about your background and how long you've been on the board, and your history in the North, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, sure. Depending on how far back you want to go, I'm an economist by trade. I cut my teeth with the Conference Board of Canada. I was a senior economist there, working. By the time I left, I was working on. We had a small international group doing development economics, which is specifically where I studied, or what I studied. So I was working in Ukraine in particular, but I was also working in Nunavut at the same time. And I found what I found interesting was that the similarities in some of their underlying challenges, in terms of they're vastly different, of course, but the interest in integrating into the sort of the wage economy, or certainly the Western economy or free market economy, was both somewhat foreign to both of those jurisdictions in entirely different ways or reasons, but nevertheless, it was development economics.
Right.
And so I made the choice because I was looking at either moving full-time into one of those two areas. I moved north because I just found it interesting, and so I moved to here and started focusing exclusively on the Northwest Territories and Nunavut economic development and growth and development, but with a particular interest in trying to change the discourse or to improve the discourse, not to change it, but to improve it, such that the economic theory and economic decision-making ideas or concepts were given greater weight.
I see.
And so really my work I'd say my work has been divided almost equally between Nunavut and the Northwest Territories over the course of the last, say, 20 years. And within that, I'd say a third of my work has been what I'd call hard economics, so working on the industry side with mining corporations, mostly opening mines, but also closing them. There's a regulatory requirement that they a study on the economic effects of their project, but and also the effects of closure depending on where they are. So I've taken that on, and I think with only a few exceptions, if there's a mine operating in the Northwest Territories of Nunavut, I've done the economics of it.
Oh, wow.
And so, and I'm now starting to work on interestingly, some of the projects that I did the economic assessment for their opening, I'm now doing the economic assessment of their closures. So, and in that, what I think that I brought to that is, prior to my arrival, that work was done very generically, and such that you put the information into an input-output model, it spits out results, and that's sort of, you package that up and you walk away.
Right.
My focus has always been on what do those numbers mean for the people who are affected by them. So when you change an economy in a small town or a small indigenous remote community, how does it affect the people from an economic lens? So and to me, the whole socioeconomic sort of concept is all economics. So
right.
So it's all about the flow of money, how you make choices, the effects of those choices, and the effects of the choices you don't make. So that's about a third of my work. I've been doing that. Another third of my work has been on what I call the social side of economics. Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot of work on housing, homelessness, poverty, local food production, which is, you probably know, as traditional economy. That's that sort of side of things, arts and crafts, fur trade, working with NGOs and Indigenous development corporations or Indigenous governments on those types of files. So, like, I just finished a fairly significant study working with all Inuit across across Canada on developing an Inuit-specific model for measuring poverty, measuring the cost of living, and then using that to determine poverty, all through the lens of Inuit worldview. So what they aspire to in terms of their lives and livelihoods, and what the type of money what they need from a wage economy, and how that translates into their needs in a non-wage economy. Mm-hmm. So that all sort of is built into the to the work. So that was kind of interesting. Then the other third is sort of a bit of a hodgepodge. I don't work for government all that much, but at times I do. But I do advisory type stuff. I occasionally do forecasting, though I tend not to. It's not that valuable in the Northwest Territories or Nunavut. And then, yeah, so that's a bit of the background, the sort of things I do. I could go into more specifics if you have questions, but that's kind of my practice, because it's just because of the way it is. Like, if you were, I don't know where you're from, but if I was in Ottawa or Toronto or something, like, you'd specialize in probably just one small piece of one of those things I do. Mm-hmm. But up here, I'm able to dabble in a lot of different things.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned the difficulty of integrating into a wage economy in Nunavut, and I imagine there's the same tension in the Northwest Territories. Do you think you could talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we can start with Nunavut. I mean, so I did one of the original studies on when Nunavut split with the NWT. Mm-hmm. I did was an author to original Nunavut Economic Outlook. And they're only just starting to understand what what their economy was, and what that meant, and it's interesting. I mean, it was only 20 years ago, and there's still so much there's still such a gap, but the role of the traditional economy is still so strong there that and a lot of, in particular in some of the smaller communities, a lot of what I call the sustainability of those communities rests around local food production. Seal and narwhal, caribou to a certain extent, but not as much as you might imagine.
Right.
Fish for sure. That it's difficult. Inuit have found it difficult to look at the modern wage economy and determine how to fit into it in a way that it doesn't leave them in 100 years from now or 200 years from now in a worse place than they are now. I've always found Inuit to be very interesting in that they take a really long view of themselves and their place in the world, and so they're very careful when they make decisions. But they're I've grown to appreciate their ability to think through sort of the problems that are put in front of them, and again through an economic lens. So I've found it's interesting. They're struggling. I think they have a massive population of young people, and there's as they're entering the workforce, their education system is not serving them particularly well, and so they're not able to participate in the growth of the resource sector as you might expect anywhere else, and that's creating tensions, as you might imagine. I don't know how familiar. I don't know if you've worked a lot already in there, or you're just starting out. So if I'm talking about things you already know, or
this is perfect.
So the percentage of Inuit that's participating in the mining industry in Nunavut is fairly low, and it's in all areas it seems to be stagnating. There's an inability to sort of get past the entry-level positions and to a certain extent some of the semi-skilled jobs of haul truck operator,
right,
or different type of operators. There's virtually no uptake in the last 10 to 15 years in the skilled or professional jobs, which is the bulk of mining jobs, is increasingly so. I mean, even some of the operator jobs are going to go to remote mining, so they won't need operators within 20 years.
Right. And you think education is a big part of why that's
education is really big, but also there's I'm not Inuit, so I absolutely not speaking on their behalf, or this is sort of from an economics perspective what I see is there still isn't a full integration into the wage economy like you might expect. Right. And over 20 years that was more than 25 years that I've been studying it, it's changing, but not at a pace that you would I would have expected. I would have expected the pace to be quicker. That when, Baffinland, for example, has a workforce, I think 2,400, although I think they've just cut back a bit. Yeah. And the number of Inuit working there is maybe 400 or 500, maybe 400. I don't know. I haven't seen the latest numbers, so I'm not sure. That's a lot of jobs, and it's fantastic because those are 400 jobs that didn't exist previously. But there's a real challenge to move it beyond that, and it's because of to move beyond that number requires your labor to be skilled or to be professional, and Meadowbank or the Agnico Eagles operations in the Quebec region, which have been around longer since I think Meadowbank opened in 2010. They've really stagnated, and when they opened Meliadine, they got a small up. So Meadowbank stagnated around 250, and they just couldn't seem to progress past that number. They opened Meliadine, the number jumps up to around 400, but you look at it, it's because there's just that many more unskilled positions become available, and if you probably don't have access to their some of the detailed labor data, but I do the labor reports for a lot of the mines.
Yeah.
So they have far more janitors working at these projects than they could possibly need, but they're trying. I think the mining sector is making an honest effort to try to offer opportunities in the wage economy such that some of them will lead to either this generation or next, like something better. But the progress has been really slow.
I see.
Yeah. And so as a result, it's what I'm seeing in the last 3 to 5 years is a little bit of a pushback from the Inuit on further development, because they're saying, hey, look, like there's, we're not sure if these operations are damaging the environment. We're concerned that they are, but if we're right about that, you guys are going to go away in 20 years or 10 years or 50 years, and we're no better off because we never really were made wealthy by it. We were able to maybe get off of social assistance for 20 years. Maybe most people there are living in social housing, so that didn't change. So you kind of, you can see it in 20 years from now, we're going to go back to the way we were living before, except that our environment is damaged. So there hasn't been this sort of, in southern Canada or in the Western world, where there's sort of a constant reinvestment of proceeds into the development of communities and the structures, the infrastructure, and the labor or the labor force skills and education. Like that's not necessarily happening to the same degree, and as a result, I think Inuit are looking and going like, gosh, like I don't know, like yeah, we can buy a new snowmobile, we got more money, we can do this, we maybe even travel a little bit, but where are we going to be in 20 years if we come out of this and our environment is damaged? So I think that's where they're struggling, and I'm not trying to say that like I have an opinion on what they're going through. This is just my observation, and I think it's where industry is struggling to figure out how to ensure a positive legacy, sort of, and we're seeing it here in the Northwest Territories. Similarly, with the diamond mine, Diavik is closing, and it's too late to be asking, oh, what's the legacy?
Yeah.
But yet that's what's happening, and Rio Tinto is kind of looking at, hey, like we've been here for 20 years. There's been all sorts of opportunities, and at some point we're going to walk away. Like that's kind of like the end of it. And I only say that because it's interesting, because I was in a meeting in 2004 with the well-to-dos in Yellowknife, and within the GNWT, and I said, this is the time when we need to start thinking about closure and legacy and how we're going to work towards that as the outcome. And I essentially got laughed out of the room.
Oh, wow.
Because 2004, Diavik had just opened. Acadie had been open for 4 years. Snap Lake was going through the EA process and likely to get its license. So everybody's like, oh, we're too busy. We're setting up joint ventures. We're getting people into the workforce. I was like, absolutely, you should be doing that, but you ought to reserve a bit of time for 20 years from now, because 20 years from now it'll be too late, and that's exactly what's happening. Like, people are saying, hey, what are we left with?
Right.
And not that they're not left with anything. They've been left with a lot. Like the transformation of the Northwest Territories, labor market and communities is unbelievable, far greater than I think than what Nunavut is experiencing. But Nunavut's environment is a little different. They've got a longer hill to climb, let's say. They're starting at a position that is a little bit further back, I'd say. Like it's the mines here have been absolutely transformational to the labor market and to the quality of our workforce. The transformation is not complete, but for those people who were sort of in a position 20 years ago to benefit from the project, did benefit, and their families have benefited, and their children have benefited exactly as you might expect. Here, when we got to the point where, okay, everybody was already sort of in a position, regardless of where you're from, Lutzelke or Gamete or Yellowknife or Betchako, if you were positioned to benefit from the growth of the economy, that was you did, and it was great. It was those people who weren't, and that's where we've sort of run into some challenges. Is I think that we've probably failed those people in that after we experienced, after we were able to see the benefits of mining to all those that were ready to benefit from it, so like we call it, like they were able to, all the low-lying fruit had been picked. Then we ran into some challenges. Okay, well, what do we do with everybody else? Okay, was that sort of like starting over with education? It's it's housing. It's labor mobility. It's intergenerational wealth transfer. Some fundamental.
And so when you talk about everybody else, who exactly does it include?
Like those people who were not able to, who are not sort of in a position to benefit.
Right.
So like whenever an economy goes through like a transformational change, which doesn't happen very often, but it did in the territory. We went from, I mean, gold mining was a small localized type of activity. It was just Yellowknife. When the diamond mines opened, it was absolutely transformational for the entire North and South Slave, such that people who were in a community who had essentially no prospects for participation in the wage economy, and for which the government had no solution. So if you were living in Lutzelke in the year 2000 and you looked at the government and say, okay, well, what's my future? The government like, I don't know. We don't know. Like, as long as you stay in Lutzelke, it's not our problem kind of thing. So when the diamond mines arrived, it said, hey, look, there's an economy out there. You don't even have to leave your community.
Right. You
just need to sign up, and we'll train you, and there you go. And so, in the span of 10 years, essentially, we went from communities with essentially no economy, they're residential and administrative centers only, to full-fledged sort of economic opportunities from both labor and business perspective. So whenever a transformation like that takes place, there will be people, and you can look at this across the world or throughout history, there'll be people that are sort of ready to benefit and those that aren't, right? Sort of the winners and losers, they call them, right? So the winners are almost immediately win. They sign up for work, they're good workers, and before you know it, they're driving truck making $100,000 a year. And these are people who previously were, living on social assistance and living in public housing. So, and you can watch as some families who are benefiting from them, benefiting so much, they are given what I'd say is the freedoms that they didn't previously had, and particularly economic freedoms.
Right.
Freedom to, obviously, the biggest one, freedom to leave if they want to. And a lot of them did. So in Lutzelke, for example, a lot of people who got employment, started making a lot of money, wanted something better for themselves and for their children, and they left the town. They either came here or they went to Edmonton, or they went, anywhere. They could go anywhere in Canada. But that was the usual destinations, was Edmonton or here. And so that happened. So if you were a loser in that group, in other words, you weren't in a position to immediately or instantly benefit from this economic activity, it's not that you were made worse off, except that now the difference between you and the people who benefited, that gap's become even really wide.
Right.
So there's somebody in a community, they're always a little bit better. Maybe they're always able to find a job here, there, whatever. They're a little bit better than me, but we're all kind of in the same boat. Now these people are way better than me, and I'm the same. So in absolute terms, your life hasn't changed, but in relative terms, it's gotten way worse.
Right.
And so we've really struggled as a territory to figure out how to help these people. Our education system hasn't helped them. There's all three mines I know for a fact have invested heavily in trying to get these people into the workforce, and not always with limited success. And so there's kind of, that's always sort of been sitting there. And as the diamond mines sort of come to an end, most of these people have, in 25 years, they're obviously 25 years older. They're sort of beyond the sort of the work age anyway. But their children, what's really disappointing is the number or percentage of children coming up behind them, or essentially in the same boat as them. So you would expect those people who have benefited, the families that benefited, their children are doing better, yes, but we haven't even figured out how to help the children of the people who we couldn't help the first time around, if you follow me. Right? And so again, we end up with even wider income inequality, which causes problems, especially when the mines close. Government has less money to spend on social programming. They run out of ideas. They run out of sort of intent and spirit. So, I mean, if I have one concern from a development perspective, looking at the Northwest Territories, is that cohort that just they weren't able to benefit the first time around, and now their children are even worse off than they are.
Okay. So what are some of the economic benefits other than those that come from employment for these communities?
Well, some of the main ones, like if for those communities that have a land claim, so that's all Clecho communities, their government receives a share of resource royalties. The government receives income taxes directly. Well, I guess indirectly, because it gets redistributed to them. All the communities have impact benefit agreements, some of which pay out a healthy sum, like we're talking millions a year. So there's some question as to where that money has gone, and some legitimate questions.
Yeah.
I often hear arguments, go to our community and we still have dirt roads, and I look at some of the financials. I go, well, where did the $50 million that you've received for things like that? So it's not all like there's two sides to every story, right? But so financially, those are some of the main sort of benefits, is through taxation, through impact benefit agreements, through resource royalties. There's of course, it doesn't sound like as much because the sort of the value is small, but the amount of money spent either and sometimes it's in kind in communities around just supporting local projects or local NGOs, or flying kids around to participate in sports tournaments, or lending resources to the volunteer network, say in Yellowknife or whatever. Like these, there's a huge community value to that. Sometimes it's not intrinsic, but it's essentially intrinsic, or it gets treated that way. But we felt in Yellowknife, when the head offices of 3 corporations left town, I could see one of the first impacts was we lost, like, most of these people are like, these corporate people are A-type personalities, right? So they're usually hockey coaches. They're volunteer at the women's shelter. They do all that sort of stuff, right? So they're both not just in terms of their warm body helping out, but they tend to be pretty skilled at what they do. They're high performers, so they tend to be like better hockey coaches and the better volunteers, or they end up being presidents and this and that or whatever. So when those corporate offices left town, you could see that, we lost coaches, we lost people working helping out at the food shelter or the food bank and that sort of thing. So a little harder to put a dollar term on, but really important.
Okay. Are there any successful ways that you've seen like long-term economic development happen that sort of like starts with a mining sector related industry, say like I don't know, catering or drilling contractors or things like that are then able to pivot to something more long-term that doesn't require dominance to be there?
Well, we're gonna find out because the model that was given to Indigenous groups by the federal government, which they picked up, was this idea of development corporation.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole thesis on that. Like, it would take me hours to go through that. And I'm not necessarily sold on the idea.
Yeah.
But I'll try to keep that to myself for now. But some of the more quote unquote successful development corporations have been good at initially signing up for joint ventures. Slowly, the initial joint ventures were poor. They came with massive management fees, or so essentially it would be a 51% ownership, Indigenous ownership, but a $400,000 a year management contract. So it eroded any profitability or whatever the company, right? And also meant that all the decision making was being made outside of the joint venture. So some of those are some of the early mistakes, if we want to call them, and they're not even really mistakes. It's just, so you're dealing with development corporations that were brand new. They had no real background in business. I mean, they existed. They had some small, sort of largely unsuccessful businesses. But these were big multi-million-dollar contracts where with a lot of moving parts, right? So you couldn't expect too much. But so the joint ventures were poor, and it did take a good 10 to 15 years to slowly work to break those down, or to transition into something a bit more legitimate, where the Indigenous partner had a more important role, particularly in the management decision side, to the point where we have now some of the more successful development corporations have 20 to 40 businesses, some half of which are wholly owned, the other half are joint ventures. Some of the joint ventures are just money-making operations, and I guess that's okay. They're like, hey, we will form a joint venture with Acme Corporation to do work on this, but we don't have anything to give to that business other than our name, and we'll take 1% or 2% off the revenues, or 3% off the profits, and that's essentially all it is. Other ones they're far more involved in. Right. So in terms of your question though, if you look at, for example, Deton Cho, which is a local development corporation, they have a catering and accommodations business that operates both at Gatchaqui and Diavik. the question was, could they transition to something outside of mining? Probably not, because it's a business that revolves around remote camps of a fairly substantial size. Yeah. And so early on there's these ideas, they could ultimately then compete with other sort of catering companies. But what's interesting in the Indigenous corporate world across Canada is that most development corporations have a catering company, because they, quote, pardon the pun, they cater to all of the mining and resource sector related business in their jurisdiction. And so we have that even within the Northwest Territories, where there's some catering companies, Indigenous catering companies, that are working in the North Slave. And then if you go into the Nunavut region, they've got their own catering companies working to service that region, and right across the territory. So, and we have all sorts of trade barriers that exist in the territory, such that Detoncho wouldn't go take its expertise into the Nunavut region and compete there, because they're just not really welcome. And I use, like, that's sort of like a loose term, of course, but because let's say a mining operation that would open up in, whether it's the Satu or the Detcho or wherever, will sign an impact and benefit agreement, a socioeconomic agreement that says we will contract to the local businesses. So that essentially eliminates any opportunity for competition. Yeah. And so while these are very beneficial market interference tools to establish business, it means that their life is limited to the life of the project. Yeah. And so this is going to become a problem for the territory, as so mines close. Their catering company is called Boaway. Basically ceases to exist. Yeah. because that competition isn't possible. And so it'll be interesting to see if that changes in any way, but I doubt it, because if the Satu, for example, if I don't imagine a mine's going to open up there, but let's just pretend there was one. Well, they just they're going to go through the same processes that we went here, saying no, this is an opportunity for us to develop business, and us to get education and training, and for us to enter into this world. So then Bowie needs to say, okay, well then maybe we can go and compete where? In northern Saskatchewan. Well, guess what? First Nations in northern Saskatchewan also have catering companies that they signed impact benefit agreements. So it's a if just a pure economic lens, it's what you get when you interfere with the market, is you've taken away competition, so you limit the opportunities of businesses that have been created.
I see. And so what was the federal government's vision with the Economic Development Corporation model? And are there any documents where I can sort of find that?
Yes and no.
I see.
You would have to this could be a thesis if you wanted it to be, but in my opinion, it starts with understanding the federal government's objective to move money from the federal government into the hands of Indigenous population. Okay. Let's call it early days reconciliation, if you want. Yeah. It went from giving money directly, then giving money to bands, then saying, oh no, we can't, then giving money to First Nation businesses, then giving money to First Nation businesses that actually were in a real business, as opposed to just a business name, in name only, to then saying, well, they need to be successful businesses. But each, and I've got like a whole half an hour like monologue on this. Yeah. But at each stage of the way, it really is about moving Canadian taxpayer dollars into into the pockets of Indigenous population, and as the screws tighten on how taxpayer money is distributed, in other words, like increasing the necessity for value for money, what are the outcomes of those transfers? The federal government has slowly sort of come up with new and innovative ways to make sure that money keeps flowing. And so the iteration we're on now is this idea of being in business and leveraging the Indigenous asset. So the federal government will ensure that asset is worth something. So we finally get to Giant Mine. Giant Mine is, as you know, is a $4 billion project. The federal government is paying for the whole thing, so they're imposing their procurement, Indigenous procurement tools onto the project. And as we've seen similar to, I don't know if you followed the ArriveCan app thing, and we've learned that the contract was awarded through the Indigenous procurement because Buddy happened to be, I don't know the extent to which he was Indigenous or is Indigenous. I'm not going to sort of try to argue that one way or the other, but I guess he has a property on a First Nation or something like that. This is sort of what you get, right? You get. But anyway, that's a different story. But anyway, so they've imposed their procurement strategy, which is they interfere with the market such that they raise the value of the Indigenous asset. Right. So we are the local Indigenous population. As a result, when we bid on projects, that is weighted really heavily on the overall quality of the bid. Yeah. So in other words, we're going to ensure that you get the business. We've set the business up. We've told you how to set up the business. We've helped you set up the joint venture. Now we're going to make sure you get the contract. Right. And so it's all good, it's really important to understand from a territorial perspective how effective those policies were. I call it the buy local policies. Economists will call it market interference. Yeah, okay. The buy local policies, whether it's labor or capital, so labor or business, we're saying you should be buying our stuff. Our labor and our businesses are not ready, but you have to buy from them, and this is a policy that sort of helps that happen. The problem is now we've moved ahead. So that was a policy from 25 years ago, and as evidence to our inability to help other people to invest in our own economy and our own labor and our own business, our own capital, 25 years later with Giant Mine, we're still using the same policies, these buy local market interference type policies, saying no, like our development corporations, whether it's Deton Cho or Clecho Investment Corporation, we still want to give them a leg up because it's important for us that we ensure that they get the contracts, because that's kind of the deal we've signed. Yeah. And again, it's all well and good so long as from a territorial perspective, we're saying, like, at some point, wouldn't it be nice to be winning those contracts in open competition without the joint ventures, without the federal government sort of helping us along? Because as long as they're helping us, they can sort of, they've got their thumb on us at all times. Totally. Like, there's not actual independence, totally. And you may not see it, but they can manipulate however they choose, depending on who happens to be in power, the attitudes of the day are. We can sort of move the pieces around however we want. This is sort of the the danger of sort of not trying to take care of ourselves, right? Totally. Which is kind of where we're at as a territory. But anyway, so that's so in broad strokes, that's sort of how these development corporations sort of formed. They are quite successful, depending on how you measure success.
Yes.
They're big.
Yes.
Detoncho and Clecho investment corporations, I don't know what their annual revenues are, but it's probably 20 million or higher. And their business, their assets, and the number of businesses they have, like I said, probably 20 or more for both of them. And they're starting to diversify, so they're not just tied to the resource sector, though I would say, if tomorrow all 3 mines were to shut down, their revenues would drop by about 80%.
Yeah.
But so they're trying to buy businesses in town differently than they did 25 years. 25 years ago, they would see a retail store and go, oh, I like that retail store, and they'd buy it. And within a couple of years, it would go under.
Yeah.
Now they're being a bit more strategic. They're buying businesses that have like long-term government contracts or contracts with the city. Like Detonjo just bought Kavanaugh, which is a waste remediation or waste and garbage pickup type business. So that's something that's not going to ever go away, right? If the population in Yellowknife were to drop, it would suffer. But essentially, it's a pretty steady business. So it's a smarter choice in terms of trying to not just diversify, but create a bit of stability within their suite of businesses, because they recognize that some of their businesses are just going to disappear. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to talk a little more about the giant remediation specifically, but I appreciate all the economic stuff. It's really, really great. I didn't realize you had so much expertise in that.
I don't know. Just because I talk doesn't mean I'm an expert.
So I'd like to know how you see how the giant remediation fits into northern economic development in general. Broad strokes at first.
Yeah, well, I mean, it rightfully so. It's been positioned as an opportunity to mitigate the negative effects of mine closure. Though the concepts are a little bit misunderstood. It's when people hear that, they immediately think, oh yeah, all those people that are working at Diavik, when they get laid off, they can all work at Giant.
Yeah.
Well, that's not how the labor market works. But from a sort of a macroeconomic perspective, that is how it works, right? So you lose jobs here, you gain jobs there. So from that perspective, whether it's Giant or sort of the broader remediation projects that are coming, in particular the ones in the Satu, it does offer that opportunity for mitigation. It is still ultimately a public investment, or it's public dollars, and so there isn't depending on what your vision, how far out your vision goes, there isn't a long-term future for it. And Diavik is the perfect example as to why. So they have been actively remediating from day one. And over the last 5 years, my cousin actually was the superintendent in charge of open pit, and most of his work has been around moving rock piles, sloping, doing also like spending hundreds of millions of dollars remediating. And he's now moved jobs. He's superintendent of asset management, which basically means like what do we sell, what do we just blow up. And so the day they produce their last diamond, there'll be virtually nothing left. So when you think about remediation as an economy, which people used to use that term last year until I walked around and everyone I talked to, I said, stop talking about that.
I've heard people say that.
So I haven't actually heard it in a while, so maybe we were successful there. But it isn't the only. I'd say the only way it can become a sector unto itself like that is to eliminate your environmental regulations, and then invite some really shady miners into the territory. Then you can assure you have a strong remediation sector. But so long as you have Rio Tintos and De Beers operating, then they're more concerned about their global image than they are about anything. Right. And so you can be assured that they'll be fully remediated. It's all these there'll always be some remediation things, like you can see in the Yukon now, like where they've made some of their own mistakes, but but in the Northwest Territories, beyond the projects that are in the books, once it's done, right? And now it could be next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, so it's not insignificant. And so if I was a businessman, I would say, there's an opportunity here to gain expertise in certain aspects of remediation, particular like specialized drilling or handling of highly contaminated materials. There's opportunities there, but again, I think the other part about the remediation as mitigation is sort of the short-term nature of its role as a mitigator is what I talked about earlier. The idea that it's not like once Giant Mine is completed that all of the expertise that we've learned, like through our labor and our business, can then pick up and then move into the Satu and then benefit from everything they've learned because of the trade barriers. I would say it's a hard place to be an economist here because economics is about optimization, right? Like finding the peak of the curve, as being as efficient as possible, whereas the territory seems to make decisions as being as inefficient as possible because it means more money from the federal government. Right. So we could fix Giant Mine for a lot less than $4 billion, and we could certainly spend a lot less over across all of the remediation projects than we are. But it would mean having or reducing by like a significant factor the amount of education and training dollars, the streamlining of businesses and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. So that's the limitation of remediation is that is one, it has finite sort of future, and two, it's a uncompetitive market that's being created. There is opportunities like what I'm seeing from the non-Indigenous businesses are able to sign joint ventures with everybody, which is interesting. So you'll get like a Nahani Construction, who is working at Giant Mine both as it's on its own, but also as a joint venture partner with the Yellowknives. But they also have, but they would also have an ability to form a joint venture partnership with groups from the Satu, for example. Or I don't know if they will, but they have the ability. They work all over the north. They're working in. They have a joint venture with, I'm not sure who it is in the Quebec region, and they're also working, I think, in BC with a joint venture. So, unlike in the Indigenous development corporations, which don't seem to work together because they kind of come to everything with the same asset, which is basically their indigenous indigenousness.
Yeah.
Like a northern company that has a skill set, whether it's heavy equipment or construction or whatever it might be, geotechnical engineering, will have a joint venture partner in every single region of both the territories. So
I see.
so for them there is an opportunity, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about the specifics of employment at the Giant Remediation Project? I was looking through some of the annual reports, but I'd be interested to know about, and of course, obviously, all these numbers in front of you, of the actual employees for Parsons versus their contractors. Is that information available anywhere, or will it only be available?
Parsons don't have that many employees.
Right.
They're just the manager.
Yeah.
So quite literally, like the same way that you would build a house, you have a general contractor, which would have the foreman and a couple of highly skilled people that can kind of oversee everything. Their job is to contract everything out and make sure that those contractors are doing things correctly. Parsons is the same thing.
Right.
So their house is the Giant Mine's entire site, and they have the plumbers and the framers and the everything there. Yeah.
Right. I see.
So yeah, and I don't know Parsons' employment figures. You could find out; it'd be pretty easy, but I'd be surprised if it's more than a few dozen.
Really.
But the details on the rest of them you can get for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I think, yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I have all those numbers, and I've actually Ben would have it on his computer because I just put them together.
Maybe I'll bug you for that after this.
Yep.
Okay. Do you know what about the type of jobs that are in remediation in general? What's the what are the most common job titles or skill levels? There's still the same sort of trap with the in mining in general, where people wind up in low skill and sort of stay there until they get out, or people,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a little different in that there's not nearly as many unskilled jobs because there's no camp.
Right.
And so there isn't the food services, the accommodation, all that sort of stuff. There are some helpers, general laborers, but most people on the site will have at least a certification to be there.
Right.
But it is still the same trap in the sense that the early days, of course, before implementation, the majority of work went to the engineering firms. Obviously, science, lots of bureaucrats, and very little, obviously, no work. It's just sort of a little bit of prep work, so road building, moving dirt around, type of thing. So there would be lots of semi-skilled stuff, but now we're fully into implementation. We're seeing a bit more diverse workforce, but there's not a lot of unskilled. It's essentially a $4 billion earth moving exercise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen it. You see a lot of it if you've taken a tour. You see a lot of earth moving, but you haven't seen nothing yet. Like they're going to start really moving some rocks.
Right.
And it's just if you ever watched a time lapse video of an open pit operation or something like that, that's basically what's going to go on there. Like right now they're building the water treatment plant, so that's essentially a non-residential construction project. So there's a lot of welders, there's metal workers, there's some concrete guys there, and so those are lots of skilled guys, and then helpers helping them out, but you only need so many of those. So I don't know what the breakdown is between, but I mean, we can get them really easily.
Okay.
I don't have it on me,
Yeah,
but we can get
I'll
that
do it.
information. But it's not dissimilar to a typical mining operation or any construction project,
Right.
just with the absence of the camp.
Of course. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. One thing, and this of course shows up in the media a lot when they talk about remediation, as well as in the annual reports. But it seems like there's a difficulty in finding the type of labor that they want in the area, and they end up relying on people coming from the south. What do you think what do you think explains that phenomenon?
Well, two things. One is the quality and quantity of local labor supply, and two is our inability to attract and retain migrant work. So we sort of almost been forced to accept the fly in, fly out worker. It was accepted for the diamond mines because they needed thousands of employees,
Yes.
and where are you going to get them? And there was an initial push in the early 2000s for the diamond mines run programs to encourage people to move here permanently, and that was somewhat successful. But very quickly we ran out of something important: land. Believe it or not.
Yeah.
The city ran out of land, and so it's made house construction increasingly expensive. And we're in the same sort of housing crisis here as everywhere else in Canada.
Yeah.
And so now we've sort of grown over 25 years to be sort of have a certain level of acceptance to importing labor.
Yeah.
But at the heart of it, the quality and quantity of local labor supply, and our inability to attract and retain, as in like make them permanent residents, migrant workers. So that's not immigrants, but anybody, right?
Yeah.
Within both of those is something really critical: is labor mobility.
Yeah.
You can go into the Decho or up into the Gwich'in region and find all sorts of unemployed people, but they don't have the skills needed, or the educational background, and even if they did, they would probably be working in their region. But even if they weren't, they would then have to have the ability to relocate to Yellowknife, of which they may not have the economic capacity to do so, because that requires, you're moving from certainly if you're living in a public house, or, for example, in somewhere in the Gwich'in, how do you move to Yellowknife, which is an extremely expensive place to live, and find accommodations, and it's both economically and socially difficult, and so we're kind of trapped, and it's really important to understand that just the federal government is running this program, or this project, but they give it to Parsons. Parsons then contracts, say, Nahanni Construction. Well, Nahanni, they sign all sorts of things. Yeah, we'll do our best to hire local people, and if they don't hire enough local people, they have to pay a penalty. Well, first of all, whatever penalty they're forced to pay, they've already worked into their contract, guaranteed.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's basic economics. Second of all, they got a job to do. So if they can't find the people locally, they'll figure out how to do it. That's what business people do. So they start by flying them in. They then figure, we got to, the hotels are costing us too much money, so they figure out how to accommodate them here within the city. I mean, there's a solution for everything, right? And so that's their only job. Their job is to blast this rock or put up this building or whatever it is. So the federal government or the GNWT can say all they want. Oh, we need to hire more local people. Well, Nahanni Construction's got nothing to do with that. You show me, they'll tell me, you put a able-bodied person in front of me, I'll hire them.
Yeah.
But getting that person from the community, or whether it's Yellowknife or somewhere else, and putting them, that's your job.
Yeah.
And for 25 years, as I've argued, we haven't done our job.
Yeah. Something that I saw in the annual report was it seemed like there was an assumption between of a link between local procurement and local hiring, and it seemed like, I don't know if this is you that put this in the report, but you're really trying to poke holes.
Yeah, it was me.
Yeah, okay. I figured. Really trying to poke holes in that. Do you think you could speak a little more to that?
Yeah, well, this is I think they're trying to be sly. Myself.
Mm-hmm.
They claim that they say we have 3 priorities.
And so this is the contractors, you mean?
No, this is the federal government.
Oh, okay.
Or the co-proponents, because
Yes.
the GNWT are implicated in this
Yes,
too.
of course.
They say, well, we want jobs, we want procurement, and we want education and training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they can manipulate the market such that procurement will be a success.
Mm-hmm.
The diamond mines were able to do it. It's like 70% of all business expenditures went to northern indigenous businesses.
Mm-hmm.
They set up the same sort of targets for the giant mine, and they're guaranteed they're going to reach them.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the joint, as we already discussed, to form a joint venture to get that contract can be as simple as saying we'll take 1% of the revenue and we're 51% owner.
Right.
And that's happening. And I don't hold any grudges over any business person, whether indigenous or not indigenous, figuring out what game the government's playing and play it well.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going on, and that's what will always go on. Is why market interference like this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, and I won't get into the education and training, but they have found a way to also manipulate those numbers in an extreme way.
Mm-hmm.
So they look at it. Okay, we're trying to achieve employment, procurement, and training. Hey, we're exceeding on the procurement and the training. We're not doing so well on the employment, but hey, we're doing well on 2 out of the 3
Mm-hmm.
pillars. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Except that if you want to talk about getting the economic benefits of the $4 billion to end up in the community, which means in the hands of families, actually affecting people, they have to be working at the project,
Yeah.
or either directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
It's not good enough to say, oh, we have a joint venture worth $10 million and mark that down as community benefit when the Indigenous Development Corporation is receiving 1% of the profits, which is just going into their corporate retained earnings or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference between achieving that and saying, hey, yeah, we have 50% employment or whatever.
Right.
And they have no solution for that, so they hide behind the idea, well, our strategy for employment is through procurement.
Right.
But as I said, there's the whether you're Deton Cho, hired to do a job, blast some rock or put up a building, or you're Nahanni Construction, or you're any corporation, at the end of the day, you're being judged on the work you do, and it doesn't matter if you're indigenous or not. You're going to find employment, you're going to find labor, you're going to find capital, and you're going to do the job.
Yeah.
So, Buowi, which set out as being heavily indigenous labor force, is now only marginally indigenous labor force for all sorts of reasons, but it ultimately comes down to those factors I talked about before. The quality and quantity of local labor and our ability for labor mobility.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about the expenditures of the remediation project? Like, what are the most expensive parts of it? Is it
Moving rock.
Moving moving rock, yeah. Like how much is spent on labor versus spent on, like equipment?
That all depends on, like you can find all that out through, if you look at the input-output tables, like you can figure out, say, if you're moving rock, then you have, obviously you have the rent you pay to all your earth movers or your rock movers, and you have the rent paid to your labor. You have all your inputs, your fuel and tires and whatnot. What the ratio is, it's anywhere from, the GDP to gross output ratio is usually 50%, but depending on the industry, it could be as low as 30%, as high as 70%.
What about the economic effects on the community of, and this is one I often see in the papers of Southern labor coming in. People are always worried about housing and things like that. Is that as big of an issue as it's made out to be, or are there benefits to Southern workers coming here and staying for the duration of the project?
Other than the project getting done.
Yeah, that's true.
Without them, we couldn't function.
Yeah.
And that's not just Giant Mine. That's everything we do here.
Yeah.
I mean, try to find somebody to fix your boiler in town.
Right.
Like sometimes they show up and you learn, I'm just, I'm working for this company, but I'm from Edmonton. I'm just here for a month, sort of thing. So, but no, in terms of economic benefits, there's virtually the amount of leakage to imported labor is almost like 100%.
Wow.
Because I suppose you could say, well, if they're some of these folks are being housed in hotels, so there's obviously that's huge. Although it's hurting our other tourism business, but they're tourists as well. I call them job tourists. Like they come and they consume the same thing, right? They stay in a hotel, they go to the restaurants or whatever. Although it's often usually these crews will get catered, right, as opposed to off a menu. But they also stay out in like camp accommodations out in the industrial park of town.
Oh, really?
So I'd say the majority of the imported labor are staying out there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Whereabouts is that?
Oh, you could just drive around. You can see. You can find officially there's no work camps.
Okay.
So work camp is where you have accommodations, food services, and everything all combined.
Yeah.
Worker accommodations is a workaround that businesses have learned, is that they have 2 or 3 lots that are side by side. They put accommodations on one. They put food services on the other.
Yeah.
So that's work. That's in terms of local lingo. That's worker accommodations. Versus it's not camps. So there's at least 4 or 5 of them that are sort of easily recognizable, but there's probably smaller ones sort of throughout town.
Oh, shit. Where are the big ones?
All in Can Lake, which is the industrial area.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So in that sense, those are, they're living there. The accommodations require some services. They require food. So there's a catering company associated with those accommodations through those businesses, and somebody had to have put them in place. They tend to be southern firms who come up with, they arrive with several of these portable accommodation units. They set them up. Their job is to set them up and rent them essentially, and then another company comes and services them, like it provides services, whether it's cleaning or food services. Again, they tend to be imported labor. So in terms of benefits, we're talking about like the land that's being leased, the taxes they're paying. It's pretty small.
Yeah, wow. And those are mostly for the giant remediation project?
It's in part, but it's also, those guys will rent to anybody, right?
Right.
DND is putting up a building, National Defense.
Okay.
They're consolidating. There's a couple of different. We have a couple of different military units here, and they're putting a big building up so they can all be in the same place.
Okay.
But I think it's a $70 or $80 million project. That's what's the construction company? JSL is
Right.
doing it. So they're from Edmonton, I think.
Right.
But they're contracting local people. So some of them will be. My son even went out there and worked. So
oh yeah.
yeah. But if they are importing labor, they would stay in those types of camps as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's most of my specific questions. And I've taken over an hour. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But I think to end off, I'd just like to know, in very broad terms, where's the? Do you have any hope for the North? That's development.
I don't.
This has been, maybe it's just the way we've been framing all this has
Yeah.
been pretty pessimistic.
Yeah.
Or what is your vision of, what a developed North looks like?
Yeah. Well, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
The biggest reason we're in trouble is we don't realize how much trouble we're in.
Right.
We can function, and we will learn how to function as a welfare state.
Yeah.
For potentially longer than we need to be. And that's just unfortunate, but it's a reality.
Yeah.
So we need to learn how to do more with less, which is a term I hate, but I'll use it in this context. Because what I mean by make more with less is that we need our labor and our capital more involved in our own economy and less dependent on imported labor. And we're going to have to be better at that, and our challenge is similar to the story I started with about Nunavut, is that which means the quality of our labor supply has to be better. And if it's not, we will not be able to. So as the economy contracts, you can say, okay, well, we'll just need less and less imported labor, right? And our labor will just take a larger and larger portion of the jobs that are available, and we'll be just as well as off as we were before.
Yeah.
Because we are our economy is a supply driven, in the sense that the demand in the NWT's economy is greater than what we can supply. So the more we can supply, the better we're off. And so this idea of the overall economy contracting, it's like, oh, that's okay, because we're not supplying all of the economy anyway. We'll just as a share, our supply will go up, but on absolute level, it'll stay the same, so it'll be equally well off. The problem is, as our economy retracts, so goes our unskilled and semi-skilled jobs. So the ratio between the skilled, semi-skilled, professional management type jobs stays the same. And we don't have people to put into those higher level jobs.
Yeah.
So they can't transition from an unskilled job in the diamond mines to a skilled job in, the construction sector. Because that's just not a transition you can make. So unless you improve the quality of your overall labor supply. And so that's where, if without that investment in some of the fundamental sort of in the foundations of a successful economy, capital and labor, is where we will struggle. There's no the amount of economic activity in the territory will continue to outstrip what we can supply, even if it's federal government money.
Yeah.
We'll just lose all ability to have any sort of control over development. We will lose out on if you happen to be some poor soul living in a small community that's dependent on social programming largely, like there's no real active economy in your region anyway, or in your community. As our economy contracts, the local government will have less and less money. There'll be less resources for the really people who are in a particularly bad position, right? And so those guys I really fear for.
Yeah.
Like, communities that need, are maybe suffering, they have infrastructure deficits as a result of climate change. They've got some damages as a result of forest fires. Maybe they got, maybe they desperately need a new power plant, or their houses are dilapidated or whatever. Where's the money going to come from? Not the federal government. The federal government will continue to sort of hand it out sort of in dribs and drabs, and they'll make a big deal out of it. Oh, $50 million for housing. Oh, well, let's be happy about that. But then, for the next 10 years, there'll be nothing. So there's a slow deterioration of the quality of life for people living in these communities. Yellowknife will be fine. So that's my concern. My vision, if I were ever to be made king for a day,
Yes.
is to look beyond a 4-year mandate and say, there are resources in this territory of a great value. We just need to put them all together. And there's energy, there's minerals, there's water, there is people, there is certain geographical limitations, but there's also geographical opportunities. Access to the Arctic Ocean, as an example, right? And so, we're at the point where the territory needs to sort of re-envision what it is and what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, we just sort of we're reactive. Oh, we had mining for a while. Oh, mining's going to go down. I guess we won't have mining. Well, hold on. We've had mining for 100 years, and we may be seeing the end of it. And people are like, oh, okay. And there's been virtually no investment into ensuring it that it continues. The perfect example is we construct a ice road right to the diamond mines. We've been doing so for 25 years. We've to date the investment has been in the neighborhood of if I get this number right, I think it's in the neighborhood of $500 million has been invested in a road that disappears every year.
Yeah.
That would be enough money to build half of the road, or certainly would have been in the original dollars, right?
Right.
So it's easy to say now, but this is why you have a vision, right, for your future. Mm-hmm. If 25 years ago we said, rather than building a ice road, let's figure out a way to construct an all-season road and have it being a joint public and industry funded endeavor, right? Mm-hmm. Industry has already spent $500 million on it, mm-hmm. and why couldn't that money have been put towards a permanent road, right? Mm-hmm. And had it, you'd be looking at some of these mines they close down not usually because they're out of diamonds or out of gold or whatever. It's the cost of getting the last 5 or 10 or even 20 years worth is too high. Yeah. A road helps you get rid of that problem.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a true lack of vision from that on that perspective. Is that I think, and there's a lot of there's about 45,000 different opinions as to what the territory should be and what it should focus on. But we've really failed to find the leadership to consolidate that somehow. Mm-hmm. And we haven't been able to bridge the gap between, say, what the democracy wants here. We elect officials. They're supposed to be our leaders. Mm-hmm. In every region of the territory, there is a chief, or is a grand chief, depending on what the political situation is, the governance environment is. They operate on a different set of on a different paradigm. Decision paradigm. They're looking. They don't have the whole territory, the future of the whole territory in mind when they make decisions, and it's a great detriment to the whole territory, especially if a certain decision cuts off the opportunities for growth elsewhere. And we haven't been able to, nor have we made much of an effort to say, we're stronger together than we are divided into 7 or 8 different pieces, and it's been like that for a while. But what I fail to see is an effort to try to bridge that gap in any way.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I see. On that note, I've been reading a lot about the Mackenzie Valley pipeline inquiry. In my research, and it seemed like there was a political moment where everything had come together. The First Nations had formed these organizations and united.
Yep.
All of them. Industry had, and obviously it fell apart in the end. It didn't work out. But there was deals that really comprehensive, really massive scale was going to tie everything together. It seems like that does give me hope in that it is possible to have that sort of united vision.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it was united, but it was also around there were so many mistakes made in terms of one of the things that we do often here in the territory is we're kind of major project centric.
okay.
In that major projects come along and everybody gets excited around a major project. Oh, this is going to be the silver bullet.
Yeah.
And MTP was just another one of them, where you had all the politicians running around talking about, oh, this is going to solve all of our problems, either directly or through this indigenous pipeline group that was formed, through all the different economic mechanisms or market mechanisms that are going to be created. And so expectations grew and grew and grew and grew, though this is good, that this is going to be the panacea. And it got out of hand to the point where you had the indigenous communities saying, well, we will support the project only if there's a significant investment in fixing all the problems that we have, social problems essentially.
Yeah.
And actually the federal government said yes. It was ultimately, it was far too late, but they said yes to, I think Ben might remember, it was like something in the neighborhood of $500 million for a set of communities up the valley to address social problems, long-standing social problems, which was interesting because to my mind, the federal government was saying yes, agreed that there's these problems and this is the cost of them. That seemed to get dropped, but anyway. But it was so late in the game at this point. Like there had been so much sort of wrangling around, we need all of these problems fixed before we say yes, that eventually like the project had sort of long since sort of gone away. So the mistakes that we make is that you have to get projects up and running first before you slow them down with all these other things, and so we seem to do that.
You think it's similar with the diamond industry, the obsession with major projects?
The diamond mines were a bit different in that, the diamond mines, 25 years ago, IBAs and socioeconomic agreements were pretty new.
Right.
So those were the tools that were used. So in a sense, the BHP and Rio Tinto kind of took the lead, and they said, okay, well, we will find mechanisms to provide that social money. And in fact, I think, hey Ben, was it BHP or Rio that cut $500 checks for everybody in Betchaco? So in 98, 99, they rented the gym at Betchico, and they set up a table and they handed out checks. Every man, woman, child, $500.
Oh wow.
So that's how they dealt with it.
Mm.
So the federal government, of course, weren't going to do that. They had to sign a program and all this. It took years and years and years. The guy who was going to get his $1 million bonus for getting a caddy open,
Mm-hmm.
or $10 million bonus probably, it's like, what does $500 per person cost me? I don't know, $100,000. Done.
Yeah.
And it was a freaking nightmare. The RCMP had to put on an extra detachment. The money was gone in a weekend in Yellowknife.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, the diamond mines did it a little differently.
Yeah.
Because they can, because they can, at the end of the day, everything has a value, and they're like, well, if their check mark costs us $500 a person, and that fits within our capital costs or cost structure, then we'll do it.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I guess that's the end of the interview.
Okay.
Thank you so much to both of you. This has been
Yeah.
I've really learned a lot. Do you have any thoughts, Ben? What you overheard or anything? No.
No, it's good. It's good. I think well, you're talking to the right man.
Yeah, I certainly. There's a couple things that I was going to bug you about after, in terms of numbers. Should I shoot you an email or something?
Yeah, send me an email, and I can provide you those
Grab your,
numbers.
email then?
Yeah, it's G Clinton,
Mm-hmm.
and then you gotta spell it @home@gmail.com. So
Okay,
AT home.
home.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking when I came up with that.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I'll be all then.
Okay. All right. How long are you?